Beneath the twin moons of Velmara, the grand capital of Somara gleamed like a celestial jewel. Towering crystalline spires reached toward the heavens, their iridescent surfaces capturing the pale violet luminescence of the planet's atmosphere. It was a city defined by power, tradition, and an unyielding order until tonight. Ronan Voss stood motionless within the royal throne room, his midnight black combat armor absorbing the dim glow that flickered through the chamber. His presence was an anomaly, a human, a warrior from the distant colonies of Earth, standing amidst the noble elite of the Velmarian Empire. For 6 years, he had served as a trusted commander in King Kaelros' elite guard, earning his place through bloodshed, strategy, and unwavering loyalty. But nothing could have prepared him for what was to come. The air hung heavy with silence, thick with anticipation. King Kaelros, his formidable presence accentuated by the jagged crystalline protrusions extending from his high cheekbones, scrutinized Ronan with piercing golden eyes. The king's very being was a force of nature, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of empires. "Commander Voss, your service has not gone unnoticed," Kaelros intoned, his deep voice reverberating through the chamber. "You have proven yourself worthy of the highest honor Velmara can bestow, a gift beyond measure." The massive throne room doors groaned as they swung open. The assembled nobles shifted uneasily as Princess Alara stepped forward. She was breathtaking. Her emerald green skin shimmered faintly, and her flowing, dark teal hair cascaded down her back like liquid silk. Draped in delicate black fabric that accentuated her ethereal grace, she exuded an aura of quiet strength. Her luminous golden eyes locked onto Ronan, not with fear, but with something else entirely. Ronan's pulse quickened. This was no ordinary ceremony, no simple reward. Kaelros extended a hand toward her. "My daughter shall be your mate." A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber, hushed voices exchanging glances of disbelief. A human, bonded to royal blood? It was unthinkable. Ronan drew a sharp breath, his mind racing. Alara was royalty, a princess of Velmara. This was not a mere gesture, it was a statement, a calculated move. He parted his lips, ready to speak, but Kaelros silenced him with a raised hand. "I understand your concerns, Commander," the king said. "She is incapable of producing an heir. Our physicians have confirmed it beyond any doubt. Were she fertile, such a union would never be considered. But since she cannot continue the royal bloodline, I see no harm in allowing her the happiness of a mate of her choosing." Alara's gaze did not waver from Ronan's, and then he saw it, the slight tremor in her fingers, the subtle rise and fall of her chest. Not fear. A profound silence settled over the throne room. Ronan could feel the weight of the moment pressing against him like a tidal force. He was a soldier, a strategist, and yet, standing before the luminous princess, he knew that whatever choice he made here would alter the course of his life forever. The words came before he could stop them. "I accept." The chamber erupted into murmurs. Kaelros merely nodded. "Then it is done." The ceremony was swift, an exchange of words and symbols binding their fates together. Within hours, Ronan and Alara were relocated to a private wing of the palace. Alone on the grand balcony overlooking Somara, the capital stretched endlessly below them, a sprawling empire of glass-like architecture, glowing pathways, and technology so advanced it bordered on sorcery. Alara turned to face him. "I have watched you, Ronan Voss," she said softly, her voice smooth yet laced with steel. "Your strength, your honor, you are different from them." Ronan exhaled, shifting his stance. "Different isn't always better." "In this case," she murmured, stepping closer, "it is." A strange current pulsed between them, something unspoken, something neither of them fully understood. Above them, the twin moons of Velmara shone bright. Two celestial bodies orbiting the same world, yet destined to collide. And so began the impossible union, one that would shake the foundations of an empire. The first night passed in tense silence. Ronan remained standing near the massive balcony overlooking Somara, his instincts still wired for battle despite the supposed peace of his new circumstances. The weight of his decision pressed against him like the heavy armor he had worn in countless battles. This was a strategic move, not a reward. The king had made that clear. But why? Why pair his own daughter with a human, even if she was declared infertile? The thought nagged at him. There were other ways to remove a useless royal from succession: exile, ceremonial positions, or arranged marriages with lower nobility. This was different. Behind him, Alara shifted in her seat, her delicate features cast in the ambient glow of the crystalline cityscape. "You regret your choice?" she observed, not unkindly. Ronan turned, studying her. "I don't regret choices. I just don't make blind ones." A small smile flickered across her lips. "You think my father has ulterior motives?" "I know he does." Ronan folded his arms. "I don't believe for a second that a ruler as calculated as Kaelros would hand you over to me without a deeper reason. This isn't just about you being infertile, is it?" Alara hesitated. A brief flicker of something, pain, uncertainty, crossed her golden eyes before she composed herself. "What do you know of Velmarian tradition, Ronan?" He exhaled. "I know you hold purity above all else. Bloodlines are sacred. Your ruling class has been the same for generations, carefully bred and controlled." She nodded. "And what do you think happens when that system begins to fail?" Ronan frowned. "You mean?" "The infertility isn't just mine," she whispered, voice barely audible. "It's happening across Solmara's noble houses. Our genetic purity is weakening us." Ronan stiffened. This wasn't just about her. It was a crisis, a slow decay in the very foundation of the Empire. "My father believes you humans may hold the key to stopping it," Alara continued, voice measured. "Your species is adaptable, resilient. Even when faced with extreme environments, you thrive. That is why I was given to you." Ronan clenched his jaw. This wasn't a gift. It was a calculated gamble. The king was testing whether the infusion of human genetics into the Velmarian bloodline could be a solution. And I agreed to it. Alara rose from her seat, stepping toward him. "I won't be a pawn, Ronan, not to my father, not to anyone." Her defiance was clear. She might have been given to him, but she had not surrendered herself. Ronan met her gaze, searching for deception, but found only resolve. She hadn't asked for this any more than he had. "Then what do you want, Alara?" She studied him for a long moment before speaking. "Freedom, to choose my own fate, to define myself beyond the constraints of my birth." A slow understanding settled between them. Ronan had spent years following orders, but even he knew that some battles could not be won with strategy alone. If they were to survive whatever game Kaelros was playing, they would need to trust each other. And for the first time since the ceremony, he allowed himself to believe that this might not be a battle he had to fight alone. As days turned into weeks, a strange sense of normalcy settled between Ronan and Alara. Though their marriage was a farce in the eyes of the Empire, their bond slowly began to deepen. She was sharp-minded, her wit often matching his own, and despite her upbringing, there was a quiet rebellion inside her, a desire to challenge the traditions that had shackled her since birth. Ronan, for his part, found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't expected. She wasn't just another aristocrat playing politics. She was a warrior in her own right, battling against the invisible chains that bound her. But peace was fleeting, because whispers had started to spread. The nobles of Solmara were restless. A human warrior paired with royal blood was an insult to everything they believed in. Even if Alara was considered barren, even if this union was meant to be a symbolic gesture, it was still a threat to their fragile sense of superiority. Ronan sensed it long before the first attempt on his life. The attack came at night. Ronan had been restless, his instincts keeping him on edge. He lay awake in their quarters, the soft ambient hum of the palace filling the silence. Alara was asleep beside him, her breathing steady, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond the walls. Then, a shift in the air, the scent of metal, the faintest sound of a blade sliding free of its sheath. Ronan moved before the assassin even reached the bedside. Steel met steel, the clash of weapons shattering the silence. The would-be killer, a masked figure clad in Velmarian royal guard attire, recoiled in shock at Ronan's speed. He had expected an easy target. He had been wrong. Ronan had spent years following orders, but even he understood that not all battles could be won through strategy alone. If they were to endure whatever scheme Kaelros had set in motion, they would have to rely on each other. And for the first time since the ceremony, he allowed himself to believe that this was not a fight he had to face alone. As days turned into weeks, an unusual sense of normalcy settled between Ronan and Alara. Though their union was nothing more than a political arrangement in the eyes of the Empire, an undeniable connection began to form between them. She was intelligent and sharp-witted, often matching him in conversation, and beneath the veneer of royal obedience, he sensed something more, a quiet defiance, a desire to break free from the traditions that had bound her since birth. Ronan, for his part, found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't anticipated. She was not just another noble entangled in political games. She was a fighter in her own right, waging war against the unseen shackles that had held her captive her entire life. But peace was fleeting. Whispers had begun to spread. The nobles of Velmara grew restless. A human warrior bound to royal blood was an affront to everything they held sacred. Even though Alara was deemed barren, even though this union was meant to be symbolic, it still posed a challenge to their fragile sense of supremacy. Ronan sensed it long before the first attempt on his life. The attack came under the cover of night. Ronan remained alert, unable to shake the sense of unease pressing against his instincts. He lay awake in their quarters, listening to the faint hum of the palace that filled the silence. Beside him, Alara slept soundly, her breathing steady, unaware of the danger lurking just beyond the walls. Then, a subtle shift in the air, a metallic scent, the almost imperceptible whisper of a weapon being drawn. Ronan reacted instantly. Before the intruder could close the distance, Ronan moved, intercepting the attack. The sharp ring of clashing metal shattered the stillness of the night. The masked figure, dressed in the uniform of the Velmarian Royal Guard, hesitated, startled by Ronan's speed. He had expected an easy target. He had miscalculated. With practiced efficiency, Ronan countered, using his strength and precision to subdue the attacker. In mere moments, he had forced the intruder against the wall, holding him firmly in place. The man resisted, but Ronan's grip remained firm. "Who sent you?" he demanded, a low chuckle. "You don't belong here, human. You never will." Ronan's mind worked quickly. This wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't a random act of defiance. Someone within the palace had orchestrated this. Someone wanted him gone. Behind him, Alara stirred, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. What's happening? Ronan didn't break his focus from the intruder. Someone just sent a message. With a swift, deliberate motion, he rendered the man unconscious. Keeping him alive was necessary. This wasn't just an act of defiance. It was a calculated warning. And as Alara met his gaze, he knew she understood the same truth he did. This was only the beginning. By morning, Kaelros' response was notably absent. The incident was dismissed as an isolated act, a misguided rebellion, nothing more. But Ronan saw through the deception. If the king had wanted to, he could have eliminated any sign of dissent immediately. Instead, he chose to let it linger. He's observing, testing the limits of his own people. My father isn't stopping this because he wants to see how far it will go. He's waiting to measure the real extent of the threat you pose. Ronan exhaled, his fingers tightening around the balcony railing as he gazed over the city. Then we show him exactly what kind of threat I am. Alara turned toward him, curiosity flickering in her golden eyes. What are you thinking? Ronan's gaze shifted downward, toward the hidden parts of Velmara, where murmurs of unrest had begun to grow into something more substantial. You told me your people are weakening, Ronan said quietly. Their lineage failing, their future uncertain. His eyes locked onto hers. What happens when they realize I'm not their enemy, but their only chance at survival? A flicker of understanding crossed Alara's face. Her father had miscalculated. The resilience of humanity, the instinct to endure, and now, for the first time, the fate of the Velmarian Empire was no longer dictated by its king. It was in their hands, and they were just getting started. Ronan Voss had been a soldier long enough to recognize when he was standing at the edge of a war. For weeks, tensions had been mounting in Velmara. The attempt on his life had been brushed aside, but whispers of unrest only grew louder. The nobles debated in secrecy. The royal guard observed him with sharper scrutiny. The people of Velmara, once indifferent, now watched him with either curiosity or quiet resentment. But the moment that changed everything, the moment uncertainty erupted into full-scale upheaval, came on a night that should have been uneventful. It began with Alara collapsing. The evening had been still, too still. Ronan had spent the day training in the palace's sparring halls, pushing himself harder than usual. If war was inevitable, he needed to be ready. Alara had observed from the balcony, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. You push yourself like a man expecting to be hunted, she had remarked. I am being hunted, he had replied. But when he returned to their quarters later that night, he found her doubled over on the marble floor, clutching her abdomen. Her breathing was ragged, and her normally radiant skin had dulled to an unsettling pallor. Ronan was at her side in an instant. Alara. She barely managed to lift her head. Something's wrong. His pulse pounded as he reached for the comm link embedded in the wall, activating an emergency medical alert. The palace physicians arrived swiftly, their silver robes billowing as they surrounded her. Glowing blue scanners passed over her body, analyzing vitals in quick, precise motions. Ronan studied them carefully, his instincts picking up on their unease. The subtle glances they exchanged. The way one physician adjusted his readings twice, as though doubting the results. What is it? Ronan demanded, his voice sharp with urgency. The lead physician hesitated. Then, without so much as glancing at Ronan, he knelt before Alara in silent reverence. Ronan tensed. What the hell are you doing? The physician's voice was barely a whisper. Your Highness, you are with child. Silence blanketed the room. Alara's golden eyes widened in shock. That's not possible, she breathed. I was declared infertile, my father. The physician bowed his head. Your father was either mistaken or he was lied to. Ronan's mind raced. If Alara could conceive, then the entire foundation of her father's rule, the entire justification for their union, was based on a lie. He turned to the physician, his voice like steel. Who ordered her diagnosis? Who declared her barren? The man hesitated, sweat forming on his brow. The High Council of Medicine. But they were under orders from the king. Kaelros. Ronan clenched his fists. He had suspected the king had an ulterior motive. But this was beyond manipulation. This was a betrayal of his own daughter. Alara pressed a hand against her abdomen, as if still trying to comprehend the weight of what was happening. Her father had known. He had lied to her. Why? She whispered. The physician swallowed hard. Because if you could conceive, your child would be the first hybrid of our species. The first proof that our bloodlines could mix. That we are not so different after all. Ronan felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about Velmara's future. And Kaelros had been willing to sacrifice his own daughter to prevent it. They had little time to process the revelation before the throne room summons arrived. The order was absolute. Ronan and Alara were to present themselves before King Kaelros immediately. Ronan knew what was coming. The king had learned of the pregnancy. And if Kaelros was summoning them now, it wasn't to offer congratulations. The throne room was cold. Not in temperature, but in presence. Kaelros sat upon his high crystalline throne, his golden gaze burning with controlled fury. The nobles lined the walls, whispering amongst themselves. Some looked afraid, others. Ronan stood tall beside Alara, his shoulders squared, his mind already calculating escape routes. King's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You have betrayed me. Alara lifted her chin. No, father, you betrayed me first. Kaelros's crystalline protrusions flared, the glow of his veins pulsing dangerously. You do not understand what you have done. That creature you carry is my child. Her voice echoed through the chamber, unwavering. For the first time in her life, she stood against him as an equal. A ripple of shock passed through the assembled nobles. Never before had a Velmarian princess spoken back to the throne. Kaelros's hands clenched the arms of his throne, the crystalline surface fracturing under his grip. Do you realize what you have done to the succession? To the purity of our people? Ronan stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Alara. His voice was cold, steady. With respect, your majesty, your physicians were wrong. Your people are dying out, and you know it. The king's eyes blazed. Silence, human. But Ronan didn't stop. You wanted proof that we could save your people? You have it. The child she carries isn't a threat. He's a solution. Kaelros rose from his throne, his fury radiating like a tangible force. Guards, seize them. The chamber exploded into chaos. Ronan moved first. His military instincts took over before the guards could reach them. He activated the combat plating in his armor, energy fields crackling to life. Alara grabbed his arm. The Western Passage. It leads to the atmospheric docks. He nodded, already calculating their best route. They had to escape. Now! The first royal guard lunged. Ronan caught the crystalline blade with his gauntlet, twisting the weapon free and countering with swift precision. Sparks flew as their energy weapons clashed, the room turning into a whirlwind of movement. "Stay with me," he said firmly. "We're getting out of here." Alara pressed close to him, her breath steady despite the chaos. "I trust you." They maneuvered through the palace, through the corridors that had once confined them, toward freedom, toward the unknown. Behind them, Kaelros' voice echoed through the halls. "Find them. Stop the outsider. Bring my daughter back." Ronan's grip on her hand tightened. He wouldn't let that happen. Whatever it took, he would protect her. He would protect their child. And if Velmara refused to change, then they would break free and forge a new path forward. The royal palace of Samara was a labyrinth of glowing crystalline corridors, its walls pulsing with an ethereal blue light. But tonight, that light was overtaken by the red glow of emergency sirens. Ronan and Alara ran. Behind them, the pounding footsteps of Kaelros' royal guards echoed through the halls. The Velmarian warriors moved with terrifying precision, their crystal-forged weapons thrumming with deadly energy. Ronan had fought alongside them for years. He knew exactly how dangerous they were, but he also knew their weaknesses. "How far to the docks?" Ronan asked, gripping Alara's wrist as they turned a sharp corner. "2 more levels. There's a private shuttle bay, unmanned at this time of night." Her breath was heavy but controlled. Even now, with her body carrying the first hybrid child of their species, she moved with the grace of a warrior. Ronan pressed a hand to his earpiece, activating the combat scanner embedded in his helmet. A 3-dimensional display flickered to life, mapping the palace in real time. 5 guards incoming from the North Passage, 2 more cutting across the atrium. They were being herded. Ronan scowled. Kaelros wasn't just sending his guards to capture them, he was manipulating their route, driving them toward a trap, and they had no choice but to spring it. "Stay behind me, Alara, no matter what." Her golden eyes flashed. "I can fight." Ronan smirked. "I know, but let's get out of here first." They turned another corner and walked straight into an ambush. Velmarian guards blocked the path ahead, their crystalline armor gleaming under the dim palace lights. Behind them, another squad closed in, sealing the only escape route. Ronan cursed under his breath. No way out. A familiar figure stepped forward. Commander Zelvar, Ronan's former second-in-command. "Stand down, Ronan," Zelvar ordered, his voice laced with regret. "You know you cannot win this fight." Ronan didn't lower his stance. "I've beaten worse odds." Zelvar sighed, shifting his crystalline spear in his grip. "Do not make this harder than it has to be. The king sent assassins to kill me, Zel." Ronan's voice was ice. "And now he wants to imprison his own daughter. You really still believe in him?" Zelvar hesitated. A flicker of doubt passed through his glowing violet eyes, but the years of duty, of loyalty, kept him standing firm. "I believe in order," Zelvar said, "and I believe that child should never have been conceived." Alara stepped forward, defiant. "You fear change, Zelvar, but the truth is right in front of you. Our people are dying. Our bloodlines are weakening. If we do not evolve, we will perish." Zelvar's jaw clenched. "Then let us die pure." That was the last straw. Behind them, the pounding footsteps of Kaelros' royal guards echoed through the halls. The Velmarian warriors moved with terrifying precision, their crystal-forged weapons thrumming with controlled energy. Ronan had fought alongside them for years. He knew exactly how formidable they were, but he also knew their weaknesses. "How far to the docks?" Ronan asked, gripping Alara's wrist as they turned a sharp corner. 2 more levels. There's a private shuttle bay, unmanned at this time of night." Her breath was heavy but controlled. Even now, with her body carrying the first hybrid child of their species, she moved with the grace of a warrior. Ronan pressed a hand to his earpiece, activating the combat scanner embedded in his helmet. A 3-dimensional display flickered to life, mapping the palace in real time. 5 guards incoming from the North Passage, 2 more cutting across the atrium. They were being herded. Ronan scowled. Kaelros wasn't just sending his guards to capture them, he was controlling their route, directing them toward a trap, and they had no choice but to spring it. "Stay behind me, Alara, no matter what." Her golden eyes flashed. "I can fight." Ronan smirked. "I know, but let's get out of here first." They turned another corner and walked straight into an ambush. Velmarian guards blocked the path ahead, their crystalline armor gleaming under the dim palace lights. Behind them, another squad closed in, sealing the only escape route. Ronan clenched his jaw. No way out. A familiar figure stepped forward, Commander Zelvar, Ronan's former second-in-command. "Stand down, Ronan," Zelvar ordered, his voice laced with regret. "You know you cannot win this fight." Ronan didn't lower his stance. "I've beaten worse odds." Zelvar sighed, shifting his crystalline spear in his grip. "Do not make this harder than it has to be. The king." "The king sent forces to eliminate me, Zel." Ronan's voice was ice. "And now he wants to detain his own daughter. You really still believe in him?" Zelvar hesitated. A flicker of doubt passed through his glowing violet eyes. But years of duty, of unwavering loyalty, kept him standing firm. "I believe in order," Zelvar said, "and I believe that child should never have existed." Alara stepped forward, her resolve unshaken. "You fear change, Zelvar, but the truth is undeniable. Our people are in decline. Our bloodlines are weakening. If we do not evolve, our future is uncertain." Zelvar's jaw tensed. "Then we hold to our ways, no matter the cost." That was the breaking point. Ronan reacted instantly. Faster than Zelvar could adjust, he surged forward, activating the kinetic thrusters in his armor. The standoff erupted into action. Ronan moved with precision, his armored gauntlets intercepting Velmarian energy shields. Sparks crackled as crystal met reinforced plating, the palace walls trembling from the sheer force of the impact. Zelvar's spear lunged forward, targeting Ronan's chest. At the last moment, Ronan pivoted, the edge grazing past his ribs. Seizing the opening, he countered with a decisive strike, using his momentum to force Zelvar backward. Alara moved with equal skill. She sidestepped an advancing guard, countering with precise, controlled movements. Her hands pulsed with the bioluminescent energy unique to Velmarian nobles, a power she had never wielded in conflict before. Until now. One by one, the guards withdrew under their relentless advance. But reinforcements were approaching fast. Ronan's combat HUD blinked, additional units moving in. "We can't keep this up," he muttered. "We need to move, now." Alara's gaze darted toward a nearby passage, leading directly into the engineering sector. "That way," she said. "Follow me." Before turning, Ronan grabbed Zelvar's collar, securing him in place. "This is your last chance. Stand down." Zelvar's violet eyes burned with resistance, but he remained silent. Ronan released him and turned away. They had no time to waste. Their escape had just begun. Together, he and Alara sprinted toward the engineering sector, toward the unknown. The engineering wing was silent, the deep hum of massive starship engines resonating through the corridors. Alara led Ronan toward a hidden maintenance passage, one only members of the royal family knew existed. A concealed escape route. At the end of the tunnel, they emerged into a private hangar, and there, in the dim glow of emergency lights, awaited their salvation, a sleek, black Velmarian stealth ship. Ronan's lips curled into a grin. "That'll do." Alara was already at the control panel, powering up the ship's systems. "Get in, I'll fly." Ronan hesitated. "Are you sure?" Alara shot him a look. "I trained on these long before I was trained to rule." "Get in, soldier." He didn't argue. As the engines roared to life, alarms blared throughout the hangar. The palace's security systems had detected them. "Strap in," Alara instructed. "This won't be smooth." The hangar doors split open, revealing the vast expanse of Velmara's sky. Beyond it, the stars stretched endlessly. Ronan tightened his grip on his seat's restraints. "Go." Alara pushed the controls forward. The ship surged ahead, thrusters igniting as they ascended into the night. Behind them, palace security forces mobilized, high-speed interceptors launching in pursuit. Ronan exhaled sharply as he monitored their pursuers. "We're not clear yet." Alara's fingers moved across the controls, her expression steady despite the urgency. "I know a place." Ronan arched a brow. "A place?" She smirked. "The rebellion." Ronan inhaled deeply. He had heard whispers of the Dawnlight Rebellion before, but if Alara was leading them straight to its stronghold, then this wasn't just an escape. It was the beginning of something far greater. The Velmarian stealth ship tore through the upper atmosphere, the distant glow of Somara's sprawling cityscape shrinking below them. Behind them, interceptor ships, sleek, deadly hunters, closed in fast. Ronan gritted his teeth as warning sirens flared across the cockpit. They weren't going to outrun them. Alara, tell me you have a plan. Alara's hands flew across the controls, her golden eyes locked onto the navigation screen. We're entering low-orbit airspace. If we can reach the asteroid belt past the 7th moon, we can lose them in the debris field. Ronan's gaze flickered to the scanners. That's a damn long shot. You have a better idea? She shot back. A blaring alarm cut through the cockpit. Incoming missile lock. Hold on, Alara shouted. The ship jerked violently, twisting into a sharp, evasive maneuver. The missile barely missed, streaking past and exploding in a blinding flash of blue plasma. Ronan gripped the control panel. That was too close. Alara smirked. I thought humans liked a little excitement. I like living more, thanks. Another missile warning sounded. This time, Ronan didn't wait. He leaned forward, flipping open the ship's manual weapons panel. Can we shoot back? Alara hesitated. Technically, this ship is unarmed. Ronan gave her a look. She sighed, mostly unarmed. That's all I needed to hear. He activated the defensive plasma flares, launching a set of decoys. The second missile veered off course, detonating harmlessly in the distance. But the interceptors were still gaining. Ronan's mind raced. They wouldn't last much longer in open space. They needed an escape route. Now, where exactly are we meeting the rebellion? Alara's expression darkened. We're not meeting them. We're crashing into them. Ronan blinked. Come again? She flicked a switch, activating a cloaked beacon transmission. The Dawnlight Rebellion has a hidden base in the wreckage of the old war fleet. It's inside the Graveyard Nebula. Ronan stiffened. He'd heard the stories. The Graveyard Nebula was a vast stretch of dead space, littered with the remains of warships from a battle fought centuries ago. The debris made it impossible for large fleets to navigate, which made it the perfect hiding spot. You do realize that flying into a war graveyard while being chased by interceptors is objectively insane, right? Alara smirked. And yet, here we are. Ronan exhaled. I hate this plan. You'll hate being caught more. She pulled the ship into a steep dive, heading straight for the Graveyard Nebula. The ship burst through the dense veil of cosmic dust, weaving between the floating wreckage of ancient warships. Massive, shattered cruisers drifted aimlessly, their broken hulls glowing faintly with residual energy. The nebula's thick electromagnetic interference scrambled their pursuers' tracking systems, buying them precious seconds. Interceptors are losing tracking, Ronan muttered, checking the scanners. But we won't be able to call for help either. We don't need to, Alara said. They already know we're here. Ronan's eyes narrowed. How do you know? Before she could answer, the cockpit flashed red. A massive warship, partially concealed within the nebula's shadows, decloaked right in front of them. Ronan cursed. Alara, I see it. The ship's main cannons locked onto them. The sheer firepower aimed at them was enough to turn their small craft into stardust. Then a voice crackled over the comms. Unidentified vessel, you are trespassing in restricted space. Transmit authorization codes immediately or prepare to be destroyed. Alara's hands flew over the console, transmitting her signal. Silence. Then, Princess? The voice on the other end shifted from hostility to disbelief. Alara? Alara exhaled. It's good to hear your voice, Aldrich. Now let us in before my father blasts us out of the sky. The massive warship hesitated for a moment. Then its weapons powered down and the docking bay doors opened. Ronan shook his head. You really do have a habit of surprising people. Alara smirked. You haven't seen anything yet. As they disembarked, a squad of rebel soldiers surrounded them, weapons raised, wary, and then Aldrich stepped forward. Unlike the royal guards of Velmara, Aldrich wore a mix of human and Velmarian combat gear, his crystalline armor reinforced with human plating. His features were unmistakably noble, though his piercing green eyes lacked the cold arrogance of Kaelros. Alara, you really know how to make an entrance, he said, lowering his weapon. Alara crossed her arms. It's been a while, cousin. Ronan's eyebrows lifted slightly. Cousin? Aldrich turned to him, studying him with a soldier's gaze. And you must be the infamous human. Ronan gave a short nod. Ronan Voss. Aldrich smirked. I expected you to be taller. I expected rebels to be friendlier. Ronan shot back. Aldrich chuckled. Fair enough, but you brought a war to our doorstep, and we need to talk, now. The command center was a chaotic blend of human and Velmarian technology. Tactical maps flickered on hollow projectors, displaying the growing tensions across Velmara. Your father has gone too far, Alara, Aldrich said, pacing. He's cracking down harder than ever, but your pregnancy? That changes everything. Alara sat forward. How much support do we have? Aldrich hesitated. More than before. But not enough. Many nobles fear your father, but they fear the idea of hybrid bloodlines even more. Ronan leaned back. So what's your play here? Aldrich met his gaze. You. Ronan stiffened. Excuse me? You're the key, Ronan. You're the one who broke our traditions, who proved that humans and Velmarians can produce something new. That's why Kaelros wants you eliminated. Ronan sighed. Why do I feel like I'm going to like what you're about to suggest? Aldrich smirked. Because you're not. He turned to Alara. It's time we stop running. If we want to change Velmara, we need to strike first. Alara's golden eyes burned with determination. Then let's take the fight to my father. Ronan exhaled. I knew you were going to say that. The war room aboard the rebel flagship was a storm of voices, tactical projections flickering in midair. Velmarian and human officers debated in hushed but urgent tones, the gravity of the situation pressing down on them all. At the center of it, Ronan, Alara, and Aldrich stood together, staring at the holographic map of Velmara, the heart of the Empire, and their next battlefield. This is madness, one of the Velmarian commanders muttered. Kaelros has the strongest military fleet in the system. His palace is impenetrable. We don't have the numbers for a direct assault. Ronan folded his arms. Then we don't fight him like an army. We fight him like an infection. Aldrich raised an eyebrow. You're suggesting an infiltration? More than that. Ronan's gaze was sharp. We don't just need to beat Kaelros. We need to make sure the people of Velmara reject him themselves. Alara nodded. His entire rule has been built on control, on the belief that our bloodline must remain pure. If we expose his lies to the noble houses, they'll have no choice but to question their loyalty. Aldrich ran a hand through his dark hair. So we get inside the palace, reach the Grand Council, and make them see the truth. But that still leaves one problem. He turned to Ronan. Kaelros will never let you live. Ronan smirked. He's welcome to try. The plan was simple in concept, impossible in execution. While the Dawnlight Rebellion launched a distraction assault on the outer defenses of Velmara, Ronan, Alara, and a small strike team would use the chaos to slip into the royal palace. If they could reach the Grand Council chambers, they would have a chance to turn the nobility against Kaelros before he could crush them all. As their dropship descended into the city under the cover of darkness, Ronan adjusted his combat armor, checking his weapons. Alara stood beside him, her golden eyes burning with determination. Last chance to back out, soldier, she teased. Ronan gave her a lopsided grin. Not a chance, princess. The ship lurched as it passed through the lower districts of Velmara. Outside, the rebellion had already begun. Explosions flickered in the distance. Velmarian gunships screamed through the sky, exchanging fire with rebel fighters. The city was on the brink of collapse. We're approaching the main palace sector. Aldrich's voice crackled through their comms. You'll have 10 minutes before they realize the attack is just a diversion. Ronan exhaled. Then let's make them count. The palace halls were chaos. The royal guards, overwhelmed by the sudden rebellion, struggled to contain the uprising. Ronan and Alara moved swiftly through the shadows, cutting down resistance where necessary, avoiding direct confrontations. The Grand Council chambers were ahead, but standing between them and their goal, Kaelros himself. The King of Velmara stood at the far end of the massive throne room, his golden eyes blazing with fury, his crystalline armor pulsed with raw energy, his blade-like protrusions extended to full length. Battle mode. You dare bring war to my city? To my empire? Alara stepped forward, chin held high. You brought this upon yourself, father. You tried to keep our people in chains. Kaelros scoffed. And you think siding with a human will save us? That a mongrel child is the future of Velmara? Ronan's fist clenched. That mongrel child will outlive your dying empire, old man. Kaelros' fury exploded into action. With inhuman speed, he lunged, his crystalline blade slicing through the air. Ronan barely dodged in time, rolling to the side as Kaelros struck again, his strength monstrous. He's interfacing with the palace's energy grid. Alara shouted, "He's feeding off its power." Ronan's mind raced. Kaelros was using the palace itself as a weapon. As long as he remained inside, his power would be unmatched. They had to sever his connection or die trying. As the battle raged, the Grand Council doors burst open. The noble houses of Velmara stood at the threshold, summoned by Alara's transmission. They arrived expecting to see an act of treason. Instead, they saw their king, raging, monstrous, his body surging with unnatural energy, trying to harm his own daughter. Alara seized the moment. "Look at him," she shouted. "This is what you follow, a ruler so afraid of change that he would rather destroy his own people than let them evolve." The nobles hesitated. Ronan could see it happening, the seeds of doubt finally blooming. Kaelros roared, "You will obey, I am your king." Alara stepped forward. "No, father, you are afraid, and that fear has already lost you the throne." One by one, the nobles knelt before her. Kaelros' fury turned to desperation. With a snarl, he charged, but this time Ronan was ready. He sidestepped the attack, dodging the king's lethal strike, and delivered a final decisive counterpunch straight into Kaelros' energy core. The overload was instant. The palace lights flickered. The energy coursing through Kaelros backfired, his own power consuming him from within. The king collapsed, his crystalline body cracking like glass. His last breath was not one of rage, but of realization. "I tried to stop the future, and I failed." Ronan knelt beside him. "Yeah, you did." And with that, the reign of Kaelros ended. Months later, the Grand Palace of Velmara was different now. No longer a place of tyranny, but of unity. Ronan stood beside Alara as she addressed the council, not as a princess, but as the first queen of a new Velmara. "For too long, we feared change, but change has come. My son, our son, proves that we are not separate peoples, but one. And together, we will shape a future where no child is born into chains." The nobles rose in agreement. Ronan smirked, leaning toward her. "Not bad for someone who thought she had no future." Alara smiled. "Not bad for a human who thought he didn't belong." And as they stood together, watching the dawn break over a new empire, they knew this was just the beginning. The grand halls of Velmara's royal palace were bathed in golden light as the twin suns began their ascent over Somara. The city was still healing from the scars of war, but there was something different in the air now. Hope. Ronan adjusted the ceremonial sash across his chest, a foreign weight on his broad shoulders. He had worn armor his whole life, but this was heavier. Responsibility always was. Across the chamber, Alara stood before the assembled nobles, her emerald skin glowing in the early morning light. She was no longer just a princess. She was the queen of Velmara, a ruler chosen not by birthright, but by the will of the people. And in her arms, their son, Ronan Voss, the first hybrid child of their species. Alara's voice rang strong and steady. "For generations, we feared change. We were told that purity was strength, that anything outside our traditions was a threat, but that was a lie." The nobles listened in silence, some still uneasy, some still resisting, but the old order had fallen. "Velmara stands at the dawn of something new," Alara continued, golden eyes sweeping across the chamber, "and I will not rule alone." She turned to Ronan. "You, Ronan Voss, are not of noble blood. You were not born into this world, but you fought for it. You bled for it. You stood when others knelt. And so I ask you, will you stand beside me as my equal?" Ronan exhaled, looking past her to the city beyond the palace. This had never been his dream, yet somehow it felt like the only future that made sense. He stepped forward. "Always." Alara smiled. The chamber erupted into a mixture of applause and murmurs. And just like that, a human warrior stood beside a Velmarian queen in a world neither of them had ever imagined possible. But the battle was far from over. Later that night, Ronan stood on the balcony overlooking Salmara, the skyline flickering with new energy. Alara joined him, cradling Alden in her arms. Their son was sleeping, his tiny crystalline skin shimmering softly in the moonlight. Ronan traced a finger along the baby's cheek. He doesn't even know yet that the whole damn universe is waiting to see what he becomes. Alara's expression darkened slightly. Not just the universe. Ronan turned to her. You're thinking about the council. She nodded. Some of them knelt today out of fear, not loyalty. Others see our child as a symbol of unity, but a few see him as a threat. Ronan's jaw tightened. They'll try to remove him. Alara exhaled. One way or another. Ronan looked back at the city. The fires of rebellion had barely cooled, but new enemies were already watching. Then we'll be ready for them, he said. Alara stepped closer. You sound like a man preparing for another war. Ronan smirked, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his combat knife. You know me, Alara. I never stop preparing. She smiled softly, pressing against his side. Then I suppose we fight together, again. He kissed the top of her head. Always. Across the galaxy, in the deep void where no empire claimed dominion, a lone ship drifted. Inside, a figure clad in obsidian armor watched the holographic transmission of Alara's coronation. The man's face was unreadable, his cybernetic eyes scanning the image of Ronan Voss standing beside the new queen. A distorted voice spoke from the shadows. So the lost warrior has become a king. The armored figure tapped the control panel. No, his voice was smooth, measured. He's just begun his war. The transmission flickered off. The ship's engines rumbled to life, vanishing into the blackness of space. Because not all wars are fought with weapons. Some are fought in the dark, where kings are made or broken.